Now, when Sri Aurobindo looked at history, it was exactly the way he looked at everything else, in an unusual, uncommon way. It was not a history in terms of a chronicle of events, but looked at it in a global manner from a psychological and spiritual standpoint, encompassing the entire world, the past, present, and the future. So, this is a sort of a summary of the cycle that we'll be talking about. It's not strictly speaking a cycle, but a spiral, so that one will keep making progress, making some use of the previous stages that the society has gone through.
Namaste. A very warm welcome to the session. The title of today's talk is Where Do We Stand and the Way to Go, based on Sri Aurobindo's work, The Human Cycle. The speaker, Dr. Ramesh Bijlani, is a prolific writer and an inspirational speaker. He loves to use the gift of communication that he has received from the divine for dispensing small doses of love and wisdom from the inexhaustible pharmacy of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Once a professor at AIIMS New Delhi, Dr. Bijlani is now a spiritual seeker at Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. Welcome, Dr. Bijlani, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today. Look forward to the session, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Arunima. Today's talk is based on Sri Aurobindo's work, The Human Cycle. Sri Aurobindo was writing the monthly journal Arya from 1914 onwards, and that was also the period of the First World War. And that uh, perhaps stimulated him to include in the Arya also a series of essays on the history of the world. And the title he gave to the series was The Psychology of Social Development. Now, when Sri Aurobindo looked at history, it was exactly the way he looked at everything else, in an unusual, uncommon way. And it was not unusual and uncommon, it was also unimaginable, even for the uncommon man, that is the intellectual. I mean, it was a very unique way of looking at everything, a very wide canvas, a global vision, and a spiritual touch to everything that he touched. And that is exactly what he did also with this. It was not a history in terms of a chronicle of events, but looked at it in a global manner from a psychological and spiritual standpoint, encompassing the entire world, the past, present, and the future. Now, such a wide canvas in one sweep, few could have done the way Sri Aurobindo has done. So, with this little introduction, let me now turn to the slides. Now, why this particular title? Why do we stand and the way to go? You'll see as we go along with the talk. And as I said, the essays which he wrote in the Arya, which have been now collected to give us this work, were under the title The Psychology of Social Development. And it now forms the 25th volume in the collected works of Sri Aurobindo. These particular essays were written mostly during the period 1916 to 1918. And this work includes not only the work that we'll discuss today, The Human Cycle, but also two more, The Ideal of Human Unity, and a small sort of, you can say, an appendix to it, War and Self-Determination. We'll talk about the ideal of human unity and maybe a bit about war and self-determination next month. So today we'll try to stick as far as possible to the human cycle. And the basic thesis in this work is that the collective psychology of a society follows a cyclic process. And why this is important, why it's important to understand this cycle is because it's this collective psychology of the society as a whole which influences the history, the trajectory of the history of this society. And of course, Sri Aurobindo says right on the second page of this work that this idea perhaps came to him from this German historian, Karl Lamprecht, uh, who had probably then just finished. Uh, he wrote these 13 volumes on the history of Germany during this period 1891 to 1908. That was the period when he was writing these 13 volumes. And that looked at the history of just one nation, Germany. And Karl Lamprecht, although a great thinker, was essentially educated in sociology, uh, politics, economics, a bit of psychology, but not in religion or spirituality. Because, as we'll see again, he lived during this period and during the European Renaissance when all these intellectuals, in fact, kept a distance from religion and spirituality. So Sri Aurobindo, although he got the idea from here, he gave it an entirely different orientation. He looked at not just the history of one nation, but of the world as a whole, and from a psycho-spiritual point of view, rather than from the point of view of economics or politics. Now, this terminology that he used is to some extent reflective of the terminology that Lamprecht had used. Uh, society seemed to start with a symbolic age, which is essentially a religious and spiritual age, but then the wisdom is couched in symbolic terms. And these symbols are perhaps necessary, and that we can understand in terms of the Vedic period in India, because it was believed that this is a knowledge which is not really for everyone, and therefore what concerned the common man was given in terms of simpler things and rituals and ceremonies, but the uh, spiritual wisdom itself was couched in symbolic terms. But at the same time, it was a glorious period. And this in turn led to the typal age when the symbolism was unraveled to some extent, shed, and wisdom was presented in more direct terms and crystallized into the forms that it should take in society, into the type of practices that would be consistent with this wisdom. But then, with the passage of time, the practices continued. In fact, they became more and more rigid, but the symbolism and the significance behind them was forgotten. And that happens in every society. And then the society enters the age of convention. But then, now that these conventions do not make sense, many people will revolt against them. They want to understand why do we have to do this? And that in turn leads to the rational age or the age of reason. But then reason having its own limitations would once again lead to a subjective age. If we call the rational age the objective age, then this is a subjective age, and this will once again converge with the spiritual wisdom. But then it would have the benefit of having gone through the rational age. And therefore, it will not be exactly the same as where we started. So, in the sense, it's not strictly speaking a cycle, but a spiral, so that one will keep making progress, making some use of the previous stages that the society has gone through. So, this is a sort of a summary of the cycle that we'll be talking about. So, the symbolic stage, the first stage, this is predominantly a religious stage, and the wisdom is couched in terms of symbols. The principles are fixed, but the social form, the practices that these principles assume or which are reflected in these practices, they are firm and but at the same time flexible. Here, the social order would refer to, for example, in India, the division into four different uh, varnas or castes, as they are called now, which were based on temperament, not on heredity. So that social order was firm, but the social forms were flexible in the sense that this was not based on heredity. And then the social forms would include many other things apart from the division into four. And the conventions were not rigid. So that was the symbolic stage. And then came the typal stage, uh, which was predominantly psychological and ethical. And the ethical motive and discipline behind these practices was essentially dharma, the sense of right and wrong. And the religion principally occupied sort of the role of religion was basically to provide a sanction from the mystics, that is, those who had seen the truth, the rishis, to provide a sanction from their vision, what they had seen in terms of the deepest truths of existence, to provide a sanction to the sense of right and wrong. And the rest of the religion, apart from the ethical motive, was considered otherworldly. So, this is the typal stage where you are reaping the fruits of the previous stage, but then shorn of the symbolism, etc. If one were to look at in terms of India, the transition from the symbolic to the typal would by and large be the transition from the Vedas to the Upanishads, and then the post-Upanishadic period during which developed the sister religions of the Sanatana Dharma like Buddhism and Jainism. So this would cover that. And if we look at this, there was a great continuity from this to this stage. And if we put the Vedas at least 5,000 years ago, which everybody accepts, but probably that knowledge came from much earlier. 5,000 years ago was when the knowledge was consolidated in the form of the four Vedas. But even if we take it as 5,000 years ago, by the time we reached the end of the typal stage, it was at least another 3,000 years, which means it was about 2,000 years ago that we went through these stages of the symbolic and the typal stage. And this entire period was highly productive of not only spiritual wisdom, but also of material progress. So there's no incompatibility between the two because spirituality permeated every aspect of life. And therefore, we were at the top of the world, not only in terms of spiritual wisdom, but also in terms of material achievements, including science and technology. Now, this is something totally unprecedented in world history. 3,000 years of uninterrupted productivity in the spiritual field, going to the highest and the deepest level, and not insisting on any particular rituals and ceremonies. You could do just about anything so long you think it is right and get away with it. And if you didn't believe in anything that had been said earlier, you could go on your own independent spiritual quest and produce one more scripture, one more Upanishad. That's how we got more than 1,000 Upanishads. Sorry, 100 Upanishads. More than 100 Upanishads, out of which many have survived, and 10 are considered principal Upanishads. And even today, there's no bar on somebody creating yet one more Upanishad, the way Sri Aurobindo did. He created Upanishads not only in the English language, like Savitri and the Life Divine, but also one in the Sanskrit language. So 3,000 years of this Sanatana Dharma tradition, uninterrupted, highly productive, both in terms of spiritual wisdom presented in a way that provided maximum freedom with maximum order and achievement, material as well as spiritual. And this is something totally unprecedented in human history anywhere else in the world. And that is what gives India that unique character. And wisdom, which has such flexibility, goes beyond the confines of time and space. And that is what has given it this universal character. And that's why it is looked at by the world again and again, repeatedly, till now. And this is something which is something which we can be proud of, and also we have to preserve and try to put it into practice even in today's world, because it has that capacity for adaptation. It can adapt without undergoing any diminution. It can adapt and grow rather than diminish. It has that capacity. So that is the symbolic and the typal stage. But then, apart from many other historical reasons, there is a tendency to forget the original intentions and the ideals And the outward expression becomes more important than the underlying ideal. The form starts subordinating the spirit, and the society slides down to the conventional stage when a lot of the practices continue, even when they become irrelevant, or at least when their significance is forgotten. The rituals become more rigid, the practices become mechanical, done quite unthinkingly, and the significance of the practices is forgotten. And not only that, to not follow those conventions, not indulge in those practices, uh, is looked down upon. The society, starts valuing them without understanding the underlying spirit, and that, in fact, subdues curiosity. So people don't like to question them. It is enough to say that, well, this is how it has been done for hundreds of years, and therefore that must be the right thing to do. Now, that is so there is a sense of fear. But at the same time, there would be some people who will have the courage to question these conventions, ask why do we have to do it? Maybe it was relevant then, but it doesn't seem relevant anymore. And those who have this courage have to face the consequences because their numbers to start with would be small. And therefore, it will have consequences. They'll be looked down upon. They'll be ostracized. They'll be isolated. They will not fit into the society. And in some cultures, such people would also be severely persecuted. But then, as their number grows, gradually they'll start having greater force. So, after a seeding time, there'll be a time when they will start counting. They'll count in the society, they'll matter. And that is when the next stage would come. And when their number does go beyond this, then what happens is these people who are questioning these conventions, the number would grow. And Sri Aurobindo has called them the great swallowers of formulas. They will not believe in any rigid formulae. Uh, they'll swallow them. Uh, Instead, what they will do, they would reject robustly or fiercely, which means with great vehemence, in which there'll be a lot of emotion and passion and force, or with calm light of reason. The methods that they follow may be different, but they're essentially questioning the practices which have been going on for a long time because they find them either irrational or not suitable anymore with change of time. And then that's how they'll strike at the walls of the prison house of conventions. And what would they seek? They would seek the truth that the society has lost, the truth that prevailed during the symbolic age. So they will once again seek that highest truth, and that now the society has forgotten. It has either lost it or it is buried somewhere beyond recognition, beyond easy detection. And that is what will give way to the next period, that is the age of reason. So as the number of these rebels and revolutionaries multiplies, during the age of reason, healthy debate will find a place. Conflicting ideas will not only coexist but also be reconciled. There will be found ways of reconciling them to a larger truth. They'll be accommodated within a larger truth than any of these conflicting ideas individually represent. There'll be a freedom of thought, and creativity would find a safe space because creativity once again needs that freedom. You may come up with something which is not in keeping with the norms of the society, with the age of convention. The spirit of inquiry can flourish, and science finds a fertile soil in this type of an atmosphere. But at the same time, because the starting point of questioning the conventions is an individual, the age of reason is primarily a highly individualistic age and places reason on a very high pedestal. But at the same time, because the human tendency is to also look for right and wrong, even if you have uh, banished religion and spirituality the way it happened in the West, uh, the individualistic tendency also starts uh, considering the collective. So the conflict between the individual and the collective uh, sharpens, and one accommodates it to the extent that appears right. So there will be variations in where that balance between individual interests and collective interests seems to balance and harmonize. But at the same time, by and large, the tendency is more and more to be more and more individualistic, and for everything, reason is placed on the not only a high pedestal, but most of the time on the highest pedestal. Now, Sri Aurobindo has gone into this work, The Human Cycle, into reason itself in a very comprehensive manner. More than 100 pages on reason. Due to a lack of time, we'll not get into them. And he has talked about the positive features of rationality, positive features of reason, which is the highest faculty, which is clearly developed in human beings, uh, much better than in animals. And this is the most trustworthy faculty that human beings find. But at the same time, it has limitations. It can point to the highest truth. It can take us towards the highest truth, but it is not sufficient to actually make us see the highest truth. So it has its limitations. And it also has negative features in the sense that it may sometimes be misused and abused. And that happens because there are several levels of reasoning. There can be levels of reasoning where it is used to justify just about everything, including the worst things that we feel like doing. So there can be various levels in terms of whether we are trying to justify something negative, or whether it's some sort of a crude reasoning or refined reasoning, reasoning which is stretching itself to reach the highest, something like the sunflower, looking at the sun, although not actually able to reach the sun. All these levels of reason are possible. So, in a way, reason can take us pretty far if we use it well, but most of the time it may not be properly used by most of the people. Uh, and then uh, one can relate reason to religion and spirituality. It has a certain relationship with these, and that will depend partly on the religious tradition that you are talking about. Now, those are all things that Sri Aurobindo has gone into in great detail, and anyone who is really fond of reason and places it on the highest pedestal, the way people in the age of reason tend to do, would do well to read this from this work, because that is what teaches us uh, what the best way to use reason is. And sometimes, in the name of rationality, how many irrational things we end up doing. Now, age of reason is a glorious period, but as I said, it cannot take us to the highest truth. And unless we are able to organize our life around that highest truth, there remains a certain sense of dissatisfaction, discontent. We do not really get that sense of life having been meaningful and purposeful unless we are able to go beyond reason. And because of these limitations, there is will be a tendency to go beyond reason to yet another age in the cycle. And here it's very sort of pertinent to bring out this to it will also lighten the discussion if we look at this quotation from George Bernard Shaw, who is one of my favorite authors, a very witty author and a good thinker. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man, which means the person who will be not really looked upon with great deal of respect to start with, at least, because he doesn't fit in. So the society moves from uh, the age of convention to the age of reason because of this unreasonable man who can't fit in, who is questioning everything. And the society moves from the age of reason to the age which comes after that, that is the subjective age, which goes beyond reason and above reason, also because of unreasonable person who finds that reason is not enough. One has needs to go beyond reason. So both the transitions are made by the person who is seen as unreasonable, whether it was the age of convention or whether it was the age of reason. In either case, going to the next stage, uh, will depend upon next higher stage, better stage will depend upon this unreasonable person. So now, what is the supra-rational subjective age, which follows the age of reason? Firstly, I mean, why this word supra-rational? This is a typically Aurobindonian terminology. Because, if we look at, say, broadly speaking, the parts of the being, we have raw, unrefined emotions, which are infra-rational, because they have a tendency to draw us towards what feels good right here and now. So they are responsible for all the temptations. They are responsible for much of the crime because of passion. So that is the infra-rational character of our the emotional part of our being. That emotional part is infra-rational. But at the same time, it is possible to go beyond reason to a higher level, and that is also non-rational. But since it is non-rational but higher than reason, we can call it supra-rational. So that supra-rational is also non-rational. So whatever is non-rational may be infra-rational or supra-rational. Infra-rational are the raw, unrefined emotions, and supra-rational is what comes from our deepest self, the soul, which also has a dynamic aspect which can play a part in day-to-day life. So the soul is not there just to give us the consolation that some bit of us will continue to be alive even after we are dead and gone. Something will continue to live. It's not just for that purpose. Even while we are living this life in this world, the soul has a dynamic component which can guide us and play a role in our everyday life. And that part is supra-rational. But at the same time, that supra-rational part can throw its light on both the emotional part of the being and the intellect. So they are normally screened from each other, the soul and the surface mind, which consists of the emotional part of the being and intellect. But the screen is not total and perfect, and the screen can be weakened. It can be completely torn. And when that happens, the emotional part of the being can speak the same language as the soul. That is, it can rise from infra-rational to the supra-rational level, the emotional part of the being. And that's why the best and the most heroic deeds when they are done, when we ask the person sometimes says, it just came from my heart. Now, heart is used for both emotions and for what comes from the this dynamic aspect of the soul. So both are seen as the heart because the heart or the emotional part has now got influenced by it. And that is understandable because whether it is the emotional part of the being or the intellect, the mind as a whole is also a manifestation, a visible form, an expression of the same divinity which resides within each of us. And therefore, this emotional part of the being, although it may quite often work at the infra-rational level and tempt us towards uh, what just feels good right here and now, and in that sense may lead us astray, but it is potentially capable of rising to levels even higher than reason and give us in a split second those choices which feel good to us and tell us in advance that if I do it, I'll feel very good. Like, a person who does something heroic, like, say, saving somebody who is in danger. Uh, Now, this person is himself taking a risk, but still he feels good. That's because uh, he's responding to this uh, voice from within, from the soul, and the emotional part of the being is collaborating in it. It's telling him in anticipation that if you do it, you'll feel good, you'll have a lasting peace in your mind. So that is why he does it. So this emotional part of the being is capable of rising to supra-rational levels. But that is subjective. It's not objective. There's no reason required here, and there's no reason given. Emotions remain uh, non-rational, whether working at the infra-rational level or the supra-rational level. So which means that reason is an intermediate tool. But once the emotions rise to the supra-rational level, since reason is a very versatile tool, when that also starts working in light of this inner light, that quickly invents reasons to justify that noble deed, that heroic deed, which the emotional part of the being has chosen to do under the influence of the soul. So suprarational does not mean that reason is rejected. Reason is retained, but it is raised to a higher level. And it rises to a higher level when it starts acknowledging its limitations. Now, this suprarational age is also, therefore, the age of spiritual wisdom, but it is shorn of that type of symbolism and those type of conventions which did not make sense, which means it has incorporated in it the gains that are made during the age of reason. They have been incorporated in the suprarational subjective age. Now, in light of this, let's see where do we stand today as a nation, as a society in India. In this cycle, uh, we saw when we went through this symbolic and the typal age, we entered the age of convention about 1,000 years ago. And we got stuck there partly because of slavery. Perhaps we were enslaved because we had entered this age of convention, which is not the best stage to be in. And it the stage got prolonged and also pulled us down further because of slavery. So slavery only prolonged and accentuated and aggravated all the damage which the age of convention can do. So this is by and large we are. And uh, that is why Rabindranath Tagore had to wish and pray that we should be able to come out of this type of tendency where we lose our way in the dreary desert sand of dead habit. That is exactly what convention is about. Getting lost in a desert just because of dead habit and not being able to harness the clear stream of reason. And you are afraid to question. There's fear because you feel that if this is how it has been done for hundreds of years, how can I go against it? I'll become a misfit. So to have a mind which is without fear, which trusts the process of reasoning and is not lost into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. Into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. And here is Sri Aurobindo commenting on where Indian society is stuck. Our civilization has got ossified. It has got hardened at a certain stage. It has lost its flexibility. It has lost its freedom. Freedom for innovation and adaptation. Our dharma has become a bigotry of externals. The external visible practices have become all important, and the underlying spirit has been forgotten. That applied also to yoga, and that is why he had to revive the spirit of yoga in the synthesis of yoga. Our spirituality, a faint glimmer of light or a momentary wave of intoxication. That is all that is left as a remnant of the spirituality that we had in the Vedic and the Upanishadic age. And that is why he says that Hinduism, as Sanatana Dharma is commonly called, is itself of two types. One which takes a stand on the kitchen and seeks its paradise by cleaning the body. Now, this is a somewhat, you can say, sharp way of saying that it is confined to the externals, not forgetting this underlying spirit. The form subordinates the underlying ideal. This is one way in which Hinduism can be practiced and is practiced. This is one of the two types that exist today. Another which seeks God not through the cooking pot and the social convention, but in the soul. Now, this is what is based on the Upanishadic wisdom, which has got crystallized in the form of the philosophy that we call Vedanta. So, one is based on the Vedic rituals and ceremonies, the significance of which is not understood and bothered about. That is one form of Hinduism. And the other is which tries to organize its life around Vedantic wisdom. The later is also Hinduism. The one which seeks God not through the conventions but in the soul is also Hinduism, and it is a good deal older because that is what pre-existed the age of convention. That is what we had during the symbolic and to quite an extent also during the typal age. The later is also Hinduism and is a good deal older and more enduring than the other. This is the Hinduism that will last longer. It is older and it will last longer than this, which means we will go beyond the age of convention. Uh, Looking at the cycle, we can predict it confidently. We will go beyond it. So where do we stand and where are we going? That raises the question. And why I have particularly put this particular visual in this is because, as you can see here, in the gap between the trees, roughly you can see the map of India. So that is the idea behind this particular visual. Where do we stand, that is as a nation, and where are we going? Now, where we stand is no doubt primarily in the age of convention, but at the same time, we are going towards rationality. We are taking those shuffling steps. Maybe a small minority of intellectuals of India, yes, but all the same, they are helping the country go beyond this age of convention towards the age of rationality. Now, let's look at this cycle as it has happened in uh, the West. Uh, we can say that the Greek civilization was at its peak from roughly 500 BC to 2 AD. That was the period when they had thinkers like Socrates and Plato and uh, in medicine, Hippocrates and uh, these great thinkers, Aristotle, they all belong to this period. And this was a period which was primarily period of intellectual enlightenment, uh, finding harmony through the thought process, trying to live a good life using the intellect. And there came up various philosophies, uh, including the Stoic philosophy, which was highly philosophical, emphasizing tolerance, etc., and also Epicureanism, which considered happiness to be the greatest uh, aim of life. All that, but at the same time, it was a vigorous sort of period characterized by vigorous intellectual activity. But then it had its stage of exhaustion. Uh, the Roman Empire followed, but that was a period of decline, in fact. So, what happened was that this wisdom started getting ossified during the Roman Empire. It acquired more of a practical shape in the form of the Roman law, in form of administration, in the hospital system, in medicine. So the medical advances were made during the Greek civilization. The Greek medicine developed during that, Hippocratic medicine. What happened during the Roman Empire was what Galen did. That is essentially nothing new, but he put together, compiled everything that was known in medicine till then. So it was more a period of compilation, consolidation, repetition, rather than developing new knowledge. So there was a decline in that intellectual vigor during the Roman Empire. The emphasis was on application, administration, and organization. So it was sort of declined. And once the decline sets in, it has a momentum of its own. And that is how the West, particularly Europe, then entered the Dark Ages, which continued for about 1,000 years. This was the age of convention. It took 1,000 years for the rebels who questioned to actually uh, take the society out of these dark ages. And this happened during the European Renaissance, which roughly we can say was from 1500 AD to 1900 AD. To some extent, it's still continuing, but this we can say is the period of the European Renaissance. And the medical historian Sigurist has put 1543 as the period when the European Renaissance began. Now, Renaissance and such things, stepping out of the age of convention to the age of reason through the Renaissance is a process. And therefore, you cannot really pinpoint that in this particular year it happened. But why he has chosen 1543 as a landmark year is because this was the year during which two major books were published. One, a textbook of anatomy by Vesalius, and another, a textbook of astronomy by Copernicus. And these two books, after a period of about 1,000 years, had the courage to put in front of the world, emphasize in the form of these two books, which that observation that you make is more important than authority and testimony and antiquity. So, what has been done or believed in for 1,000 years is not necessarily true because of its antiquity. And because it has been said by some authoritarian figures like say Galen in medicine, just because it has been said by some authoritarian figures does not necessarily mean that it is true. We trust what we actually see. So, both in astronomy and in anatomy, they had the courage to assert that. And the fact they could assert it and actually publish those books can be taken as a victory of reason. And that is why he is considered 1543, which happened to be the year in which both these books were published, to be the beginning of the European Renaissance. And in fact, the uh, textbook of anatomy by, of astronomy by Copernicus was delayed by many years, perhaps because he was afraid to publish it. And the reason why he could still publish it and not be persecuted was partly because he was not only an astronomer, he was also a physician, a very well connected physician who had treated very important people, including perhaps the Pope and the royalty. And that is why he could finally publish it. And it is said that the final printed pages of the book were presented to him during his last illness. And he just had a good look at the final printed pages and died. So at the end of his life in 1543, the day he died, that he could see the final printed pages of his book, and it was deliberately delayed because of it. The same thing happened even nearly 100 years later, when William Harvey came up with his theory of circulation, which was quite different from the way Galen had presented it in the second century AD. He did not have the courage to teach it to his students, and he delayed its publication probably about 12 years before he actually published the findings of his. And he did it after he had done much more experimentation and made much more observations than were actually necessary to put forth his theory of circulation. So this fear continued even in the 17th century. Harvey lived in 1628 or something. He published his theory of circulation. So that was the period of transition when, uh, on one hand, reason was asserting itself. On the other hand, there was also fear of fighting the conventions. But all the same, in the European Renaissance, uh, characterized was the result of the society entering the age of reason, which allowed freedom of thought without fear and persecution. And therefore, one could ask questions and try to answer those questions through observation and experimentation. And that is what led to the growth of modern science. And science led in terms to, when science was applied, it led to technology. And when technology was used on a large scale, it led to the industrial revolution. And when all this happened, it appeared so fast because, it started in 1543, if we take it as that beginning. By within 300 years or so, it had reached levels which were astounding. Life had become far more comfortable. Transport was fast, communication was rapid. So, 300 to 400 years is a very small period in history. And therefore, all hope was placed on reason to wipe out the problems of human existence. That now all the problems will disappear because prosperity has now become a reality as a result of industrial revolution. But then that did not happen. And therefore, there was a disappointment. But then, there was a tendency to apply the same tool that had led to the growth of science and technology to apply it in other spheres of life. I'll not go into how it was applied to education and many other areas in life, but just to give one example, which again comes in the ideal of human unity rather than in this part of Sri Aurobindo's work. So we'll talk about it more next month. But these two contrasting systems of government, communism and democracy, they were also the product of the age of reason. And if you look at them, they were both very well intentioned and both were very rational. But they also symbolized the limitations of reason because the ideal of democracy was summed up in the slogan of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. But then Sri Aurobindo points out that democracy did give some liberty, but then it was if you give that liberty, the present level of human consciousness is such that you will never be able to have equality. Communism tried to give some semblance of equality, but then if you try to achieve that semblance of equality, you will be able to do it only if you take away liberties. So liberty and equality are in fact contradictory at the present level of human consciousness. The key is fraternity, which means the key is a sense of brotherhood, universal brotherhood and sisterhood. Now, if that is there, then liberty and equality will automatically follow because you will not keep your brother in chain or sister in chains. So liberty is guaranteed, and you will not remain well fed and starve your brothers and sisters, and therefore equality will be ensured. So the key is fraternity, and fraternity has not been possible so far because of the level of human consciousness. The finest product of the age of reason was an ethical code based on reason. And that again, Sri Aurobindo has gone into greater detail in the ideal of human unity. We'll talk about it when we talk about that work next month. But all the same, it suffered from the same limitation, the present level of human consciousness. So even if you have an ethical code based on rationality, when actually put into practice, because of that limitation of the human consciousness, the level of human consciousness, which is primarily ego-centered, you'll not be able to achieve the intentions of this ethical code. And therefore, no matter how reason was applied, whether through industrial revolution or through democracy or communism or through this code of ethics, reason failed to wipe out the problems of human existence. But then these failed experiments did teach a lesson to the West. And what did they teach? That reason does not work. If reason does not work, they started looking for something better and higher than reason. But there was no going back to religion because reason could not be banished. Religion had already been banished during the European Renaissance because there was a conflict between the predominant religion in that region, that is Christianity, and that had been already sidestepped, kept in a corner, and there was no going back to that religion, which required belief in dogmas which reason did not support. And therefore, if they could not go back to that religion, then where did they look at? They looked at something else, and that is how the West entered the supra-rational age of subjectivity around the year 1900, when all these failed experiments had taught that lesson. Once again, if we have to look at a landmark, the landmark here, when the receptivity of the West to the supra-rational spiritual wisdom, which India can provide, the year was 1893, when Swami Vivekananda made his famous speech at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And it was well received because Europe had already become receptive to this ancient Indian wisdom because they had exhausted the possibilities of rationality and they are looking at for something which was supra-rational in character. So during the supra-rational age of the Western world, particularly Europe and North America, we find that now there's a high receptivity to ancient Indian wisdom. Yoga and Buddhism can be considered our best export products in this area. Ayurveda is not far behind, and very soon Sanskrit will also follow. And already there's at least one school in London which teaches Sanskrit to all the children as soon as they enter school. Another some other indicators, there can be too many, but I just put a few, that the receptivity to ancient Indian wisdom is rising in the West. One of the pointers, came in the Time magazine, the issue dated 12th March 2012. Every year they have this cover says 10 ideas that are changing your life. This comes once in a year. In 2012, one of those 10 ideas was The Rise of Nuns, an article by Amy Sullivan. And now, who are these nuns? Nuns are people who believe in God, they engage in spiritual conversation and prayer, they participate in humanitarian work, but they are nuns because they say that we have no affiliation to any organized religion. So they are not religious, but they are spiritual because they do believe in a higher power, which you may call God by any other name. And they are happy to engage in spiritual conversation. They do pray to that higher power, and they give an expression to this through humanitarian work. And some other indicators are the declaration of the International Day of Yoga and the World Meditation Day, and the International Day of Spirituality probably is not far behind, and the growth in spiritual tourism. So many travelers from the West coming in ever increasing numbers to India come to the place where this wisdom actually originated. And by and large, studies have shown that they come for two reasons. One is to search for the deepest truths of existence, to get answers to those questions like who I am, what is the purpose of life, how did this material world begin, what is the relationship between the creator and the creation, and so on and so forth. They come looking for answers to these deep existential questions in ancient Indian wisdom. The second reason they come for is that they find that life is miserable. They find that they have not been able to deal with the misery and suffering in life using rationality, and therefore they feel that maybe Indian spiritual wisdom is what will provide them the solutions. So all these are indicators that the receptivity to ancient Indian wisdom is rising, and the landmark can be considered to be 1893 onwards. It has been on the rise, and therefore we can say that the Western world in this cycle is now moving from the age of rationality towards this non-rational but supra-rational subjective age, in which it is lapping up ancient Indian wisdom to both understand life better and to solve the problems of human existence, the misery and suffering, which have been considered as a given in the world, but which, as Sri Aurobindo has said, just because it has always been so, it doesn't have to be so. The world can change for the better. In contrast, you can see that we are at this stage of convention and moving towards rationality, and that explains why we are resistant to our own wisdom, because we have not yet gone to this part of the curve. And as you know, Dr. Nadkarni, who was one of the most powerful exponents of Sri Aurobindo's works, uh, he says in one of his books, our intelligentsia has been swearing by Darwin, Freud, and Karl Marx, but they have simply ignored Sri Aurobindo, one of the few independent thinkers that India produced in the 20th century, who dealt mainly with the same issues that these three thinkers did. Sri Aurobindo dealt with everything. He has dealt with evolution from the spiritual point of view, the way Darwin did from a physical point of view. He has looked at psychology in a way that is, it goes much beyond Freud and even Carl Jung. And Sri Aurobindo has also talked about equality and how real equality through a psychological oneness can be achieved, something which Karl Marx talked about. So Sri Aurobindo has dealt with the same issues that these three did, but in the light of whose writings we are better able to appreciate them. We are able to better appreciate in the light of Sri Aurobindo's works, even Darwin, Freud, and Karl Marx, because he presents the complete truth, which each of these thinkers distorted in his own way. So we are happy with this diluted and distorted these ideas and do not care to look at Sri Aurobindo. What about India's future? Logically, we can say that yes, we'll also move from the age of rationality towards the supra-rational age, but then there are warnings and other possibilities, which also Sri Aurobindo has pointed out, and very realistically. So we should be heedful of them. Either India will be rationalized and industrialized out of all recognition, and she will be no longer India. So India as truly India should be and has been, it will no longer be so, because under Western influence, it would have been rationalized and industrialized. Or else she will be the leader in a new world phase, that is guiding the world towards the supra-rational age, aided by her example and cultural infiltration, not through a military conquest, but cultural infiltration, which is happening, because now too visible to be ignored. The new tendencies of the West and spiritualize the human race. So this is happening. And we can see that this danger has not totally disappeared, because this can happen independently of this. But then at the same time, if Europe took 400 years to come out of the age of reason to go to the subject, to the suprarational age and so on, we don't have to take that long, because history does repeat itself, but doesn't have to repeat itself exactly. And why in this particular case, we don't have to repeat it and take that long is because we are different. Spirituality is in our blood. Even the man in the street, even today, uh, doesn't take 2 seconds to say that God is everywhere, even in dead matter. It doesn't take long to reconcile to all the tragedies in life by saying that, well, it's God's will. Must be something good about it. Now, spirituality is in our blood. We are different. Our religion is different. It is insight based. That is, everybody has that freedom to go on an independent spiritual quest, and the religion itself is based on the insights of a large number of rishis. Unlike some other religions, the Semitic religions, which are revelation based, which are based on the revelation of God's word to the founder of the religion, and and therefore that is taken as the last word. The type of freedom that exists because of the religion being insight based is something which can make us move much faster towards the suprarational age. And then, if something is happening in the West, as we saw, the West itself is moving to the suprarational age and is making use of ancient Indian wisdom to do it, we will be quickly influenced because the world has shrunk. Communication is so rapid, getting influenced by what is happening elsewhere is happening much faster than ever before. And therefore, we should be able to get to the suprarational age much faster than Europe did. We can't wish away history, neither our history nor the history of Europe, but all the same, concentrating on India, we have to realize that this also is a part of history. While we have the Sanatana Dharma rooted in Vedanta, based on Vedic and Upanishadic wisdom, uh, we cannot deny that our contact and collision with contrasting cultures during the 1,000 years of slavery is also a part of history. And the scientific revolution that uh, Europe went through from the 16th century onwards, that also is a part of history, and we have not remained aloof to it, and we need not remain aloof to it, and we should not remain aloof to it. And this Western scientific revolution engineered in the West a civilization which is very glamorous, very tempting, and therefore that also is something which is a new force which can divert our attention uh, in a direction and make us make the same mistakes which Europe made and go through the same type of failed experiments, because the civilization has those comforts and those conveniences and that glamour which can be very tempting. But then we should learn from their lessons. So the dominance and pull of the Western civilization also cannot be denied. And there are designs of hostile forces within and without. But we can deal with all these pitfalls and risks because the contact and collision with contrasting cultures should be handled through in a spirit of critical assimilation. Assimilate, but not unthinkingly. The scientific revolution, yes, we should not ignore it. We should harness it for a noble use because scientific revolution is value neutral. It can be used put to good use and bad use. And this applies to everything, including what we have now in the terms of the social media and artificial intelligence. All this is a part of the scientific revolution, which is also continuing along with everything else. So we should harness it for noble use. And the dominance and pull of the Western civilization, this can also be handled by overcoming temptation and learning from the Western experience that they ultimately realized that there is something beyond the glamour which kept them busy and kept them in this hope that all this will solve the problems of human existence. And the designs for the hostile forces within and without, this is being talked about a lot, particularly these days. The dangers from within the country and from outside the country. We have to stay awake and alert, look up and within rather than look down and out. In other words, we can't wish away history. Therefore, we should neither try to retrace the steps nor try to reproduce the way India was in the Vedic and the Upanishadic times, but instead recreate something better than that, making use of all the historical events that we have gone through during the last 1,000 years. And if we don't recreate, it will be a tragic irony. And this is something, these are the two messages which I'll show and then stop. which Sri Aurobindo gave towards the time when he was about to leave the body. He left the body in 1950. This is something that he said in a message to the nation through the Andhra University. It would be a tragic irony of fate if India were to throw away her spiritual heritage at the very moment when in the rest of the world there is more and more a turning towards her, that is towards India, for spiritual help and a saving light. So the West is looking at us more and more. It will be a tragedy if we throw away that heritage. This must not and will surely not happen. But it cannot be said that the danger is not there. So he was quite sure that it will not happen. He had that confidence, but same time, we have to understand that it's not that it cannot happen. The danger is there. After these long years of subjection and its cramping and impairing effects, a great inner as well as outer liberation and change, a vast inner and outer progress is needed if we are to fulfill India's true destiny. And another message that he gave on the 15th of August 1947, in which he uh, expressed the 5 dreams that he had. Uh, I'll talk only about the last or the fifth, the final dream, which was that a step, his fifth dream, the final dream was a step in evolution, which would raise man to a higher and larger consciousness and begin the solution of the problems which have perplexed and vexed him. So, the ultimate solution to all the problems of existence will be a rise in the level of consciousness, and that is round the corner because evolution is poised for that next leap. And essentially, what it will mean is that the typical human nature would change from the ego driven personality that it is currently to a love driven personality. That is what will change the world and wipe out the problems of human existence, such as inequality, injustice, cruelty, misery, and suffering. There is still a personal hope and an ideal which has begun to take hold both in India and in the West on forward looking minds. So, in the West, as well as the forward looking minds in India, are looking at this possibility, this next step in evolution. That is an encouraging fact. Here too, if this evolution is to take place, that is in this, he's talking in terms of the entire world, since it must proceed through a growth of the spirit and the inner consciousness, the initiative can come from India because we are the uh, repository of that wisdom which is needed for mm, carrying forward this process of further evolution. And although the scope must be universal, that the central movement may be here, so India can be the epicenter of that movement, which will engulf the whole world and make the world a better place to live in. So you see, even on 15th August 1947, if you look at his dreams from the first to the fifth, you find that he has gradually widened the scope, starting with his dream for India and finally ending with a dream not only for the entire world and the human race, but the way the world and the human race would shape in the future. So, those who are more interested can go to the original work, The Human Cycle, which has these other works which are related. And one of these, at least the ideal of human unity, we'll talk about next month on the 10th of May. And if you want to get a sample of 15 or 20 pages from the human cycle, uh, you can also go to this recently published book, published by the National Book Trust, the Diary Divine, which has 1 page long passages from a very wide variety of Sri Aurobindo's works. So you just have to read 1 page at a time. And where you'll find the passages from the human cycle, you can easily locate because there's a table at the end which tells you which passages from which work you can find. And a summary of this was also published in the Call Beyond, the magazine of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, in the 15th August 2022 issue. We love to hear from you. You can always write, and Arunima will repeat this email address on which you can send us comments. And gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making the session possible. And thank you all for being there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bijlani, sir. We are really grateful that you share your deep knowledge and wisdom with all of us. Let's open the session to the participants. If anyone has a question or anyone wants to share something, please go ahead, participants. You can drop your messages in the chat box or you can raise the hand and unmute yourself and speak up. Yes, Preeti, please.
Hello to everyone. Namaste, Bhaiya.
That's it.
It's the first time I have seen such a representation and such a talk on um, this topic and this understanding. So thank you for sharing this. I just want to know what heading would you give to those that spiral evolution happening? Is there some way where we can understand this change happening from conventional to rational?
Now, from moving from convention to
No,
age of
the whole
convention to
cycle that you have tried to
Hmm.
pictorially shown, what heading would you like to give to that? Like it's
The heading Sri Aurobindo has given, no, the human cycle.
human cycle. Okay.
This is the human cycle,
I
the
missed the
cycle that,
first part,
uh,
so
in its broad essentials, it applies to every human society. In its broad
yeah,
essentials.
it can also represent a household. It can also represent a country. It can
Yeah.
also yeah.
Yeah, it can
Right.
represent individuals as well as societies as
Yes,
a whole.
yeah. I could see that evolution in my own family, that
Mhm.
cycle. So I could relate. Thank you so much for sharing.
Participants, does anyone else want to share their views or any questions? Please go ahead.
नमस्ते डॉक्टर बिजलानी, मैं आकाश सोंदी बोल रहा हूँ।
Yes.
नमस्ते डॉक्टर बिजलानी, मुझे इस बार भी आपकी बातें सुनकर थोड़ा वैसा महसूस होता है जैसे मैं आपकी ये स्पिरिचुअलिटी टॉक से जुड़ता हूँ। तो मुझे याद है जब वो श्री सुरेंद्र नाथ जौहर और मदर से जो बोलते हैं कि कैसे कोई फोर्स रहती है जिसकी वजह से मैं यहाँ आ जाता हूँ और मुझे मेरा ऐसा लगता है कि आई एम मतलब मुझे आई फाइंड माई सेल्फ सेंटर्ड एज पार्ट ऑफ दिस टॉक। सो आई वांटेड टू एक्नॉलेज दिस, दैट
Thank
इज
you.
वन। और दूसरा, मेरे सर दो चीजें मुझे थोड़ा सा बॉदर कर रही हैं पिछले कुछ दिनों से, पिछले कुछ महीनों से और कुछ अभी जो रिसेंट वीक में हुआ। तो एक तो सर वो यूएस इलेक्शंस में भी मतलब ट्रम्प के आ जाने से जो इतना मतलब एक अलग तरह का डेवलपमेंट केओटिक चीजें चल रही हैं। और दूसरा अभी अभी मोस्ट रिसेंट जो अभी एक्सीडेंट हो गया कश्मीर में, तो उसको लेके मैं मतलब वैसे मैं कई बार सोच रहा हूँ कि क्या उसका एक्सप्लेनेशन है, शुड आई इवन थिंक ऑफ दोस, और मैं फिर कभी कभी मैं ये सोचता हूँ कि उसको छोड़ दूं और मतलब जो श्री अरबिंदो ने जो लिखा है उसमें मतलब उस पर्टिकुलर ये जो थॉट्स मुझे इधर उधर भटकाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं उसके बजाय मैं उस पर फोकस करूं जो कि मुझे ज्यादा मतलब ज्यादा वैल्यू का है मुझे मतलब। लेकिन फिर भी एक वो होता है जैसे इमोशनल फीलिंग होती है जो इतने सारे डिस्टरबेंस चल रहे हैं उसको लेके। अगर आप कुछ कमेंट करना चाहें तो आई विल अप्रिशिएट दैट।
I think I'll just comment through one little thing which Sri Aurobindo has said in the Uttarpada speech, that the divine works through those who work for him, and the divine also works through those who work against him. So the way in which divine works are mysterious and beyond human understanding. So, and at the same time, one can also say that uh, in the larger picture, even if something happens which in no way can be considered a part of the divine plan, then the divine, in the larger scheme, there are always mid-course corrections that the divine can apply. Because for the divine, to intervene at crucial moments to make sure that the uh, divine design prevails, that power that divine has. But that doesn't mean we should not do what our bit. So we continue doing our bit, and the divine intervention will ensure that the design of the divine prevails. As the mother also said, that the will of the divine prevails against all conflicting human wills. So that will happen. We keep doing our bit. And sometimes it may appear that somebody is doing something very undivine. That can be also a way of fulfilling the divine plan. One simple example would be, say, the divine worked not only through Ram, but also through uh, uh, Mantra and Kaikai. If Mantra and Kaikai were not there, how would Ravan die?
यस, धन्यवाद सर। मैं मतलब बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपका इस रिस्पॉन्स के लिए।
Thank you, sir. So, before we close today's session, let me quickly inform that the recording of today's talk and all Yes Talks are published on our YouTube channel, Yes Spirituality. Please do visit the channel and explore extensive content on yoga, education, spirituality, and related subjects also like self-help, psychology, and wellness. Dr. Bijlani, sir, thank you so much once again for sparing your valuable time for all of us. And thank you, participants, for being with us today. We'll close today's session now with a moment of peaceful silence. Namaste.